Hi class, in today's lesson we're going to move on from looking at line, which we looked at in the last lesson, to looking at our first principle. So if line was an element, which is one of the building blocks that we put into a layout, these are the ways that we make decisions about what to do with those building blocks. So as well as line, other elements that we might have would be things like illustrations, images, text, shapes, so on and so forth. So alignment, which we will look at today, is really, well, I suppose our aims today are to make sure that you can identify where alignment's been used within a layout, and that you'll be able to discuss how it's been achieved, and that you'll be able to choose tools within Xara to create alignment. Now, that latter part is something we'll come back to when we're in class. So for now, we're really just going to focus on the first two parts. Now, there's really a very simple reason that we use alignment, and it's simply because it makes our layouts look sharper, more organised, more professional. Within a layout, alignment can be a useful way of linking visually, elements within a page. So, for example, if we look at this one here, the menu options at the top, they're all obviously different menu options, but all these little pieces of text on the website, which are clickable links, have the same purpose. So by making them all aligned, it makes it quite obvious to us that these are the different options for navigating about the site, rather than just having them all randomly spread around the page. Beyond that, alignment can help to create a relationship. So for example, down here when we look at the title of this product, and then we look down below, all the information that relates to it is aligned with it on this left side here. We also have alignment for decorative purpose, and just because it makes things look nicer, like over here where we have this shape aligned, the right side of the shape aligned with the image. And so generally, if we take time, like we have in this layout here, and this layout here at the bottom on the left, to align elements, or at least to think about how we align the elements and place them on the page, we're going to get a much better effect. It's going to look much more professional, because if you don't, like these ones on the right hand side here, you can quite easily end up with a layout that just looks a bit kind of clumsy and unprofessional looking. So alignment is, I would say, probably the simplest and easiest way to make a layout look good. Whatever you've got on it, if you align it, generally if you align it, that's a good starting point. Or align relevant parts, we should say. Anyway, moving on. So how do we do it? We'll start by thinking about alignment within a layout, that is between the different elements on the page. So that would be, like we said before, shapes, text, images, lines, and so on. So the ways that we would commonly align things are either by their edges. So if we look at these objects here, they're aligned by their bottom edges and their left edges, and that's as a group they are. But then within that group, these two are aligned right and left, as are these, and again the bottoms are aligned here. So these are aligned by their edges. Now below that, where we have the circle and triangle, this is a good example of something being aligned through its centre. Those are aligned vertically on their centre or through their centre, but equally if these were flipped 90 degrees, they would still be aligned through their centre. It's just they'd be aligned horizontally, or at least in a horizontal line, as opposed to in a vertical line. So the different objects that we place within a page can be aligned with each other using their edges or their centres. And these are obviously just blocks to illustrate the point, but you could imagine those being a text box with information in it, or an image, or just a block of colour, for a shape, for decorative purposes. So whatever it happens to be that you're placing on the page, you think about the space that it occupies and its edges and its centre lines. And it can also be within the layout boundary itself. So if these are the objects within the layout, the boundary is the outside edge of the page, or the layout, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a web page or a poster. So if we look at this example at the bottom here, we can see that we have horizontally everything pretty much centrally aligned within the layout. So within the page boundary, all of these bits of text here and the image are all aligned centrally, not only with each other, but with the page as a whole. Because it would be possible to make this layout, and instead of having all of these aligned centrally with each other and aligned with the page, they could all be aligned, this bit of text, this bit of text, this bit of text in the image, but it could be off to the side, so that they would all be centrally aligned, but they would not be centrally aligned with the page. And quite often you just make these decisions based on what's going to look best, and quite often that's about your opinion. But understanding that we can identify and describe alignment by looking at objects or elements within a page and thinking about where their edges are in relation to each other, the centers are in relation to each other, and also where they are in relation to the boundary of the page as a whole, is our kind of starting point whenever we analyze a layout and we want to talk about alignment. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll come back to another example later on, and by all means practice, pause this, take a look at what I've put up on the board, or the page should I say, have we think about it. So the other thing that we could talk about in terms of alignment is text alignment. So putting aside boxes of text, if we imagine these as like a text box and a block of text, within that block of text, we have options about how we align that block of text in relation to the space it occupies. So with text alignment, quite often when we're creating text, in most cases we put text within a box to really give it a space to occupy. And that's usually the case for larger bodies of text where we've got kind of extended text like in an article or a magazine. But it could even just be additional information at the bottom of an advertisement or a piece of packaging or whatever. But that box is the space within which that piece of text has to exist. And so it's kind of like generally an invisible boundary around that piece of text. Sometimes you might add a line to a text box around the outside edge of the text, but usually it's kind of an invisible outline of where the text has to sit. You can't see it, but it kind of creates a space that the text is going to sit within. So alignment within a text box is really just about how the text is aligned in relation to that boundary, not to the page as a whole. For example, we could have a piece of left aligned text, but the left side of this piece of text might actually be somewhere over at the right of the layout itself. It might not actually be at the left side of the page. Although, to be fair, generally you would use left aligned text if text was going at the left side of the page, and right aligned text if it was going at the right. It's not a rule though, it's just one of the things that you see quite commonly used. Likewise, we have center aligned text, and that's where the text is, or each line of text is shifted so that the outer edges are equally spaced from the center, if you imagine the center line down it. So we've got left aligned where the left side is where all the lines of text are aligned to, right aligned the same, but it's the right. And with justified, it's a little different because in justified, the left and the right side of each line should be aligned, and that's achieved by varying the spacing in between the words. So you'll see on this line here, which has less words, there's much bigger spaces, whereas this line here that has more text has smaller spaces. And that can be quite good because it creates a nice clean edge down both sides, particularly when you're using columns of text in a magazine or a newspaper article to keep the width of each block of text down. So those are the common ways that we might align text within its own text box. But there are some more creative ways that we might use text alignment, and the first of those is using text wrap. So text wrap is where we take our text and we make it fit around something else. So the thing it's fitting around might be a graphic, like it is over here. It might be some shapes, it might be an illustration, it might be an image like it is here. But in any case, the key to spotting text wrap is that the edges of the text will follow the curves or contours or shape of another object that kind of overlaps with it. So that basically it doesn't overlap with the shape. The shape kind of shoves into it. Now, it can be quite confusing if you're being asked to identify it, because we could look at this bit of text over here and say, well, actually this text is justified, and that would be true, because each of these columns of text are justified because they have the left and right side aligned, but they are also using text wrap. The text wrap is kind of an additional, I suppose, way of aligning text. Likewise, over here, this piece of text is left aligned, but it is text wrapped to this graphic. This bit is right aligned, but it's text wrapped to the graphic. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So I guess really what I would say is if you're being asked to identify what sort of alignment is being used, if you can see that there's a graphic or an object which is kind of infringing on the space of the text and creating that text wrap effect where it has to kind of wrap around the edges, then you probably want to talk about text wrap rather than whatever the kind of more boring part of its alignment would be. And similar to text wrap, but not actually the same, easily confused though, is concrete text. Now concrete text, I'll just try and move that out of the way so you can see a little better, is used to create a shape. So as opposed to text wrap where the text fits around a shape to make space for that object, whatever it might be, in concrete text what we're actually doing is we're fitting the text within the space that creates that shape. Like these examples here for a Pepsi advertisement or this kind of Charlie Chaplin poster, or this bit of text here about I'm assuming it's baseball, or I think it's polo, I'm not sure, but anyway. The text has been shaped within that space so that it fits, or the text creates the shape of the object itself. And the name concrete text might sound a bit odd, but it's actually, when you think about it, relatively straightforward, and it comes from the principle of concrete being molded. So it's imagining that the text was concrete and the shape that you want it to create is the mold, and so you're kind of pouring the text into that mold so that the text is set and leaves the shape of the object. That's the thinking behind the term. At least I believe that's what it is. So hopefully that helps you remember. So we've got text wrap and concrete text. And finally, we also have asymmetrical alignment. If we look at asymmetrical alignment, we'll see that it doesn't have a vertical or horizontal, well, it doesn't have a vertical line either side. And you couldn't even say that it has a central line that's kind of going straight down the middle of it that's aligned to. It's almost that the edge of the text is diagonal. And so if we look at other examples here, this is maybe not quite as neat, but it's still asymmetrical text. The text is not aligned symmetrically down the center, and it's not aligned down a nice straight line at either side. So it's all just kind of, I guess, nudged either way, and thus asymmetrical. So those are the different ways that we can use alignment. As I said before, it's between the elements themselves on a page, within the page itself or the layout boundary, and we can look at alignment within text boxes or within where text is. Text isn't always put in a box when it's extended. It quite often is, but not always. Like for example, when you do concrete text or text wrap, you might be using text that's not actually in a box. So what you've got to do, hopefully that makes sense, what you've got to do is complete this assignment here. Now within that assignment, there are, I'm just going to pause this a wee second because I realised that there was something I just needed to change before I continued. There are two sections. So the first of the two sections is, in fact, I'll need to maybe I think there's some other wee bits that need to be straightened out. But basically, the first section is about the alignment of, let me just move this, just so I don't get this more confusing than it needs to be. I just realised that this section's in the wrong place. So that should be there. Let me just pause. Right, sorry about that. I just realised that the section headers were in the wrong places and I didn't want to cause any confusion. So section 1 is about identifying page and content alignment. That's the first bit that we talked about, where we're looking at the objects within the page and thinking about how they align with one another. We're not at this stage talking about how text is aligned within text boxes. Let's be clear about this first section here. So for example, we don't want to talk about how this text box is left aligned. We might talk about how that text box is aligned at its left side with something else on the page, but we're not talking about text box alignment. That is what you would be doing in this part here. So this part of the the quiz, this section 2, is a multiple choice about different types of text alignment. So each of these is an example of piece of graphic design, and you have to identify which type of alignment, which type of text alignment, should I say, has been used within it. And in most of them, I've highlighted the area that you've to identify from in yellow, because in this one, for example, there's text up here, but there's also some text at the bottom. So it's just so you know which bit that you're talking about. So those ones are all multiple choice. At the top, though, you have two 2-mark questions just to get you started. This one's quite an easy one. This one's still pretty easy, but maybe a little bit more challenging. And this one is a 4-mark question. I wouldn't say it's an awful lot more challenging, but there's quite a lot more alignment going on, so there's maybe a bit more to say about it. So I just want to make sure that before I finish this video, I've made it clear how I want you to answer those questions. And it does say here, explain how the graphic designer has used alignment in this layout. Refer to 2 examples. So that means you need to find 2 instances within this layout of how alignment is being used. Clearly identify which elements you're referring to. So if you're talking about them, you'd have to make sure it's clear what you're talking about. For example, you say the white text at the top, or the 2 pieces of red text, or the 2 red text blocks, or the 2 blocks of text at the bottom, or whatever. So you need to identify what you're talking about. Then describe which edges of the elements are aligned. So if you were talking about this white bit of text being aligned with something else, you would have to talk about which edges, or if it's the center, so that you're telling me what, in which way it's aligned with whatever else it is you're saying it's aligned with. So to just quickly run through that, I've just got this graphic kind of randomly that I thought might be quite useful. We could pick out a couple of things that are examples of elements within this page being aligned. So the first one I'm going to say is that this little bit of text at the top here, even though it's flipped 90 degrees round, so it's vertical, we were, because of the way we're looking at it, we'd still say the left edge of that text block at the top left is aligned with the left side of the orange shape at the bottom. We would say that the top edge of that is aligned with the top edge of the colors text. We would say that the right edge of the piece of text that says colors is aligned with the right edge of the green shape at the bottom. We would say that the text title 2 pots is aligned centrally with the group of shapes. We would say that the group of shapes and that are aligned centrally with the page boundary. And we could say that the top edges of all of these shapes are aligned with one another, and that the bottom edges of them are aligned with the bottom edge of the page boundary. So just looking at a fairly simple layout, that's, I can't remember how many, but, maybe 5 or 6 different instances. But hopefully you picked up what was important there. We're identifying what we're saying is aligned, and we're describing how it's aligned, either whether it's an edge or through its center, and what it's aligned to. That's the key to doing this right. So anyway, I'll leave that with you. Hopefully it's straightforward enough what you've got to do. If you've got any questions, though, do let me know.